Hello everybody, and there's a cold nip in the air, which means it must be getting near to the festive holiday season, which might actually come together after a fairly horrible 18 months. Let's hope so anyway. So what better than a festive Teams advent calendar for the month of December? Of course, kids nowadays expect advent calendars to have bars of chocolate, or perhaps a toy. When I was a child, you got a tiny picture of a candle or a bauble or something, and that's if you were lucky. So this advent calendar that we're going to build is going to be a bit more like the latter category, except instead of a little cardboard door, you'll get a picture and a link possibly that you can click on. In terms of technology, we're going to build a Teams extension, specifically a tab, using the Teams toolkit in Visual Studio Code. And I've got a tenant, which is a developer tenant, just check it's the right one, which we're going to use to build this into. So we're going to go to Teams, and we're going to build a tab that goes in here. And we're going to use the Teams toolkit in Visual Studio Code, and of course we're going to use the SharePoint framework. And I'm going to try and do it all in about half an hour or so, so I'd better get started. So the first thing I need to do is start up Visual Studio Code. And if we look at the extensions in VS Code and search for Teams Toolkit, there's one here, still in preview. I think it's very nicely done. You know, it's not the only way to build a Teams extension, but it's pretty quick and simple, and it solves quite a lot of the problems, particularly around things like authentication and app permissions and so on. Now, I've already installed this. I have it here in my left rail, and what I'm going to do is click on Create a New Teams App. I get a choice to create a new app or start from an existing sample, and I'm going to go for create a new app. I'm going to choose a tab. I'm going to host it in the SharePoint framework. Another option would be to host in Azure, but I'm going to use SharePoint framework. I'm going to use React as a JavaScript view framework, and I'm going to call it Advent Calendar. And that's going to be the web part name. We'll put a bit of description in here, Advent Calendar for Teams. That'll do for now. The application name we're also going to call Advent Calendar. And now it should go off and scaffold out a solution for it, which it has done here. So we've got an SPFX folder that's got a source folder in it. I can see it's successfully created. It tells me where it's created it. And then it brings up this very helpful README file. So if you work through this, if you've not done one of these before, you might need to follow this minimal path to awesome. Once you've done that, we can then go ahead, and I think I've got everything installed that I need here. I can go to provision in the cloud. So I'm going to go to my Teams toolkit, and it says actually the caption, the hover says provision the Teams app resources in Azure, but what this is actually going to do is add it to Teams App Studio, or the website that they've used now to replace Teams App Studio. So I'm going to click on that. The next thing we need to do is build and deploy the SharePoint package. So I'm going to click on Deploy to the Cloud here, which is this one. So that's the next step. Again, the hover would suggest that it was going to put it into Azure, but it's actually going to deploy it to SharePoint. And some of these steps are a little time consuming, so I might have to cheat a little bit on the video and compress time for you. And it's done, and that process did take about 5 minutes. Now the last step is to go, if we follow down the instructions here, we need to go back to the Teams Toolkit extension and do publish to Teams, and what that is going to do and got a choice here that I can manually submit. I'm just going to follow this route because I do have administrator rights in this tenant, and it says successfully published to the admin portal, and you get a bit more information here. Once approved, your app will be available for your organization. So the next thing we have to do is I'm going to go back to my Office 365 developer account, go to admin, and I do need to be an admin, of course, to do this. Show all. I'm going to look for the Teams admin center. Might ask me to authenticate again. And now I'm going to go to Teams apps, and first thing I need to just check is that under setup policies for global, that upload custom apps is enabled. Otherwise this isn't going to work. And then I'm going to go to manage apps, and the result of that last step in Visual Studio Code, which was publishing, is that I should see, if I go down here, and here is Advent Calendar. So that's the solution that I just deployed. Unfortunately, I didn't bother to give it its own custom icon, but actually the one that's the default icon kind of works quite well for this particular case. Now what I have to do here is click on that. At the moment you can see it's blocked. So if I click on it, and I then get to this page, which is sort of the details page for this application, and there's a drop down here. It's not that obvious. We need to drop that down and choose publish, and then confirm publish the application. Now the next thing I need to do is go back to Visual Studio Code. In fact, we can get rid of that now. So we can work down this list of things here. We've now done that step 5. So what I'm going to do here is debug it. So I'm going to go to the debug. A couple of ways of doing this. Let's go to here. In fact, we can go to there, or you just check that it's on Teams Workbench on Edge. So I'm going to click OK to that. Start debugging, and then Teams, the way it's set up, knows to redirect you to this local version that's running. So I'll just get that started up, and this step might also take a few minutes to complete. So that's taken a few minutes, but now I have an Edge browser instance open. I can see it's on the correct tenant. You just need to be a little bit careful. And I expect I'll have to do the two-factor authentication dance now. Type in the secret code, just as well nobody can see it. And Visual Studio Teams Toolkit has done all kinds of tricks behind the scenes to make this happen, so that when I go into here and say I want to add this to the team, and this will be general, set up a tab, and this will be the setup dialog. Now I do need to allow it to load debug scripts. That's important. And then I finally get the save button. I can save it, and here is the sort of standard out of the box welcome to SharePoint hello world type web part, effectively in a tab. Okay, it doesn't look much like an advent calendar at the moment, so we're going to have to do a bit of work on this. But one of the nice things is, if I move this out of the way for a minute, is that in here, in Visual Studio Code, we've actually got a debug capability. So now that we've got this running, I can go to the Advent Calendar web part, and let's look at that. It's calling a control, because it's using React. It's using a React component here, which is called adventcalendar.tsx. And I can change this a bit, so I can say welcome to Advent Calendar, and if I save that now, you'll actually see in this output window here, and in a few seconds I see that that process has finished. And if I now go back over to this window that's got the web part in it, well, nothing changed. There is an auto reload on here, and in fact if I refresh this browser window it will refresh the whole of Teams, which is a bit overkill. But there's a refresh button here just for the tab, so I'm going to hit that, and now I can see the change that I made to the web part. So now we've got a nice development environment where we can start doing more interesting things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this, because I'm not a huge fan of class-based React components. I like to build functional components. So I'm going to change this to, and simplify it a little bit, so I don't need these two. So I'm going to take those away. I'm going to change this to just export default function Advent Calendar. I don't need to extend this class, all that can go away. I can just say too many brackets, right, and then instead of having a render method I can simply return all this, so that can go. This is compiling again, except I've got an extra bracket I don't need. Not sure where it came from. Get rid of that one. I think that's correct. Yes. And then what we can do is get rid of some of this. Oh, I missed one. Let's get rid of that one as well. And what we'll do in here is instead we'll say, just simplify this, we'll say h1, and then we're going to pass the description. Now I need to put the description in here, and I got rid of the, just go back to here a second, got rid of this description which is being passed down as a parameter in the props. So all I need to do here actually is I can use, this is called the destructuring operator, that just takes that props and expands it. So I got description again, and I can use description in here. And again, this is the, in this case I'm using the curly braces in order to tell React that I want to insert this literally rather than it be converted into HTML. So that's the description, and then but the code's a little bit cleaner and easier to work with. So I think that's still compiling. Okay, now it's done. I'm just going to refresh. It should look much the same as it did before, except it just says Advent Calendar. Okay, so far so good. The next thing I want to do is make it look a little bit prettier. You know, when I build a web part or a Teams tab or something like that, I tend to just use a CSS file that I do myself, and what they're trying to do here is make sure that if you have multiple web parts on a page, the CSS classes don't all conflict with each other, which is a great idea, but it does make it quite a bit more complicated. So I'm going to go with that. I would normally not do this. I'd change it all, but we'll work with what they've set up here. And what I'm going to do is make a few little tweaks to the CSS here. I'm going to make this element a little bit wider. I think we'll have a little bit of margin as well. Let's make this 20 pixels, and we'll add, let's make the text color white. I want this to go on to the next line. So I'm going to say just set the color to white. I know that's not how you spell color, but that's the way we do it. Background color, I guess, isn't that important. I'm going to make that red just so I can see that I changed something. I think we'll get rid of some of these, and I think I'll make it a margin. See how that looks. And then made some changes to the SCSS file, which now needs to be compiled into CSS, and then we should, next time we refresh this, we should see a change that now the background is red, so it looks a little bit more festive. My foreground color is white, which is fine. I'm probably going to change this to Advent Calendar 2021, looks a bit better. And if I close out the settings page and do a refresh again, notice that the settings survives the page refresh. Okay, so far so good. Now we want to add a list of Advent Calendar items for the days. So what I'm going to do now is go to the team. This is what I'm looking for, open in SharePoint, because I want to store the data inside SharePoint. So of course, as you know, behind every team there's a SharePoint site, and this is the one for that Teams Dev 23 team. And so what I'm going to do here is I am going to create a new list. Now I've already done this already, just show you the process. So I need to get to the home page in the site as a whole rather than just the document library in there, and I'm going to say new list, and we'll create a new blank list, and we'll call it Advent Calendar List. It doesn't matter about the description, you can put that in if you want to. I'm not going to add it to the navigation for now, and then I'm going to create. And so I got this really boring list. So what I want to do now is start adding some columns. So first one I'm going to add is a number column, and that's going to be the day in December for calendar. It's going to be a number type. I don't want to set any decimal places. What we'll do is a few more options here. Is we can say a minimum allowed value will be 1, maximum allowed value will be 25. Require that it contains information, yes. Enforce unique values, yes. And then we'll save those settings. And then we can add a few more columns. So we'll add another one, which will be, we could add a description, I suppose, but I want to add a image, which is what we're going to show. So we'll call this icon, and that's going to be an image field. That doesn't have to be mandatory. And then finally we'll add for now a hyperlink, and this will be the link to associated content, and this is where the where the user will be taken if they click on the item in the Advent calendar. So we'll save that one. So that's my structure of the list, and I can start adding new items in here. So I can say we'll call this one the festive calendar, and the day, this will be the 1st of December. I can add an image, so I'll go off and we'll pick bit and put that in there, and then we can have a link to whatever the festive. Okay, so that's added the first one, and then I can edit in grid view, probably easier, and start adding more items here, and go to this list here, which is the same thing that I set up earlier, but I've got a list of titles, 25 of them, images associated with them. A lot of them have links as well to websites. And the first one, it will be the Festive Tech Calendar 2021. So that's my SharePoint list. Now I want to be able to get that content and render it inside this web part that we're building. So back to adventcalendar.tsx. So what we need to do is bring that content into here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to a site at pnp.github.io, which is the patterns and practices site, And if I scroll down here, to SDKs, there's a rather excellent library called PNP.js. And that makes it really easy, incredibly easy, to pull information in from a SharePoint list, particularly one in this context because we're in Teams and so we have the SharePoint context available to us. So the first thing we need to do is get the SharePoint context, and there's instructions here on how to do this. Well, the first thing I need to do is do a PNP install. So let's do that first. So I'll do npm install PNP SP and then -- save. So I'm going to go into terminal window, down into Advent Calendar, paste that in and -- save. It might take a minute. Now that we have that, we can go into our Advent Calendar web part file and use that. So I'm going to add, so practically a 3-liner. Don't need, there's a bit of white space I can get rid of here. Doesn't know what SP is, so I need to do an import. Just going to do it by hand. Import SP from, that looks better. Now this is reasonably happy. Member variable of this class is going to be public days. Doesn't need to be public actually. Any an array of any's, and then down here, because I'm too lazy to work out what the correct typing is, and then down here after we've done the setup, we can say, just take it from the instructions. If I go to packages and I want the SP1, and what are we doing? We are taking some list items, this one, and we can just steal some code from here, which is get by type. Yes, that is pretty much what we want. Get the items from a list. Put that in there, but except I'm going to say this dot days equals await SP web lists get by title. What is our list called? It is called Advent Calendar, all one word. Always makes life simpler if you can give your list name without any spaces in it. Advent Calendar. So that's the list. It doesn't know what web is. I'm going to sort that out in a second. Get. I just want items get. I think I picked up the wrong thing. It just needs to be items get. Pretty sure. So that will get the items. Just got to resolve this. It wants this. I think it's one of those, possibly all of them. Put the lot in. Right, now that should no longer be giving an error, so that's good. So what we can do is save that, and it'll rebuild it again. Now, if I go back to our web part and refresh, unless we've broken something, nothing's going to change. It looks as though we didn't break anything, but we didn't do any good either, because all we've done here is list them. But because we're in debug, what we can do is put a breakpoint here, and then I can go back over here and hit the refresh, and that should now hit my breakpoint in Visual Studio Code. Now I'm just going to hover over here and say yes, I have got a context. This is undefined at the moment, but if I step over here, fingers crossed, so what we'll do is we'll put a little bit of diagnostic logging in here so that we can just something we can put a breakpoint on. Okay, now I'm at the breakpoint, which is what we wanted, and we can look and see that this .days is an array of 25 elements, and it looks promising. It looks like the contents of our list. Not all of it is that useful information, but if we look at this .days naught, for example, in the debug console, this .days element 0, I can see, yes, that I've got, what I was expecting, the contents of the list. So we'll get rid of this breakpoint. Sorry, get rid of this line, debugging line, along with its breakpoint. And I'm going to go to here and I'm going to pass the days through as a parameter here. So I'm going to say these are my props effectively, and I'm going to add days, and that's going to be this .days. So now I'm getting a few errors because our properties don't match up, so we need to go over to, and I need to add another property in here which will be days. Errors have gone away and it should build. That looks as though it's built successfully, and again just one last quick check that it still renders, and then we'll start outputting the contents. Let's go into here and output a list of the individual components. So I'm actually going to use one of the classes that the framework gave us when it first created the project, and I'm going to say I want styles. I've got styles.container. I'm going to have styles.row, and I should really change the name of this because it's not really a row, but it's going to be one of the individual days on the calendar. But I'm just going to use that because it saves the trouble of having to go in there and change everything, because I just want to do this quickly. And then days.map, and then for each of those days we'll put a lambda in here that says day will output let's do an h2 for now. So we'll say I want an h2, and inside the h2 again I'll curly braces, we'll say d is the day, so each of the elements will say what is the value of the day, and then we'll put in the d dot title, wasn't it, of the. That should now list out all the list items. Let's see if that works. And here's the output, which looks good. We've got a list of the day and the title, so it's pulling that from the SharePoint list. Now I think what we'd like to do is have a nicer background than this, so what I'm going to do is go to, so now I have a copy here in the top level of Teams Dev 23, and in fact that's the file name, so I can take a copy of that and take that file name, and what we can do is put that into the CSS file. In this container we'll add a background image, and we're going to put in here, it's going to be that file name, except I need to, let me just copy this from the site. Well, that's better. So now we've got a nice attractive background. So what I'm going to do now is move Let's just make a little bit more space here to work in. And I'm going to move the contents of this here, where it's producing this H2, into its own React components. So I'm going to make a copy of, probably the easiest way is to make a copy of this one, and I'll just rename that to day.tsx and have a little bit of a hack around in here. Change this to day. The properties we're going to pass through is just a day. Don't want any of this really. I'm just going to effectively take this bit of code here, which is the H2, and we'll put that in there. And this is now called day.date, which doesn't sound quite so good, and day.title. So that looks okay, but now we need to change it here as well. So instead of calling that, we're going to say this is what it was, day.tsx. So it's going to be a day where day equals D. I think that's right. And now we have to import that. So I'm going to say import day from right, that. Let's see if that will build. Not seeing errors. That should look exactly the same as it did before, because we haven't really changed anything, we just refactored. But now we've got a separate class which we can work on, which is going to make things a bit easier. So the first thing we can have a go at is making this look a little bit more like an advent calendar pane. So instead of H2, let's say, and then class, now I've got to say class name inside React, and I'm going to use styles.column, which is, we might even make this an H1. So we'll have an H1 with the day. So that should, so now they're just the individual numbers. Now we want to do a bit of work on the way this is laid out. So what I'm going to do is go back to this, not the TS, but the CSS, and do a bit of work on the CSS. We'll get rid of all these, and then I'm going to decorate this. I'm going to give it a border, give each of these column elements, which are really the day, and we'll give it a border of 2 pixels dotted white. We'll have a margin of 4 pixels. And again, I wouldn't recommend using absolute measurements. I'm just trying to get something working as quickly as I can. It seems to have had quite the desired effect. Let's give it some dimensions. So we'll say, let's just kind of force it. So we'll say width 150 px, height, and see if we can just force this to make the boxes about the right shape. That's better. That's the effect I wanted. So now I've got a grid of boxes, and then each one's got a date on it. So this looks okay actually. Now currently these are all in numerical order, and I think that is because I actually entered them in this order, although it could be because we retrieved them from a list which might have sorted them for us as well. So what we'd like to do is sort of jumble up these orders a bit. So here's a trick you can do where we are getting the list and we get all the items. We can do a sort here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a sort. Let's just break this out into another line. And in here we're going to put a, let's just indent this, it looks awful like that. We're going to put a lambda expression. So a sort function takes a pair of input values and then you return a value between negative or 0 or positive depending on the order. Now normally you'd do some sort of comparison between the elements, but what we're going to do is something a little bit evil. We're going to say math.random and we'll just take a random number which will default to between 0 and 1, and then we'll subtract 0.5 from it. So it'll range between minus a half and plus a half. I'm going to say that I think this is probably going to work, but just a word of warning, you know, if any production code that you're using, just satisfy yourself that this isn't going to every once in a while get into an endless loop. So now if I refresh, I get the same thing, but they're nicely randomized in terms of the positions of the numbers. So that looks a bit more like an advent calendar where you've got to hunt for the numbers. So now we want to do something when you click on them. So let's tackle that next. And to do that, we're going to have to start thinking about state. So in a functional component, this one here, day.tsx, in order to use state, we're going to need to use React hooks, which is how we add state to a functional component rather than the way you might have done it if you've used a React class-based component before. So I'm going to bring in this use state, and what we're going to do inside here is we're going to say, let's just fix the indentation here because it looks awful. And in here I'm going to say const open comma set open. So this is an array destructuring operator, which we've used one of those before. Now we're using it in order to set up state, because this method use state is actually going to return a variable that we can use to show the current value of this open state, and then a setter, which is what we're going to call when we want to change it. And we can also put an initializer in here, so we'll initialize it to false, which is the door isn't open, as it were. So we've got a state now which is open, curly braces, to announce that we're doing some code now, and we're going to say open. Let's just indent a bit here and say we'll do a logical here and say let's send out an H1 with the word open exclamation mark, and then if it's true that it's open, and if it's not open we'll do H1 and we'll do pretty much what we had before, which was day.day, wasn't it? And that needs to be in curly braces, of course. This is going to be the one that you see when it's closed, so we don't ever want to close them again. We'll just say create a method called click in a second, and that doesn't exist yet, so it's complaining. So let me just do that now, and I'm going to say function click. And all we need to do there is say set open to true. Very, very simple. So now, if I save this, oops, we made a mistake somewhere. Error. Line 16. Oh, here it is. On click equals. Let's try that again. That seems to have worked. or built, I should say. See whether it works now. So now if I click on one of these, it should say open, and it should stay that way as well, unless I refresh, in which case everything goes back the way it was. So that seems to be working reasonably well. The next thing we can do is make it so that it actually shows the content. So I'm going to change this, just this open string is going to be an image width equals, I'm going to fix the width here because this is a little bit of a cheat. Normally I would do this through CSS, but I'm just going to force it to create an image that's 140 by 140, so it's going to fit in the box. So a little bit of a concession there. Then source equals, and we'll call this image URL. Okay, I seem to have got an extra chevron there for some reason. This thing doesn't exist yet, so I need to set that up. So let's go up here and we'll say, let's say var image URL equals just nothing, and then we'll say if day, so if day.icon, if it exists, all of them do have an icon, but you can't really guarantee that. Then I'm going to say, in that case, the what I'm going to do is say, let's say var icon equals, and I need to do JSON parse, and then it's day.icon, which we know has a value at this point. And then, so this thing here, because day.icon is actually a string, I can't do anything with that, but icon will now be an object because we've parsed it from the JSON. And then if icon, and it's actually, the variable is called server relative. Obviously this isn't strongly typed because I've just unpacked it from a string URL, but it is, I think I got that right. We can check, if this fails we'll breakpoint it again and see what the value is, but I think it was server relative URL. So in that case we'll pick up that value from there and then we'll use it down there. So let's see if that works, and that's finished, so I can refresh the page, and now when I click on one of these I get to see the image behind it, which is the effect I wanted. Okay, and then if I click it again nothing happens, and if I refresh the page I'm back to the closed doors. So that's working. Next thing we want to do is have that link somewhere. So we know we've got this link, so we need to do something very similar, and then if I guess this is day.link, let's double check. You called it link, so the underlying variable field should be called link, and then we'll say if day.link.url, if it exists then link. This isn't one of these, this is actually stored as an object or comes back as an object, the hyperlink. So that should give us a link URL. So now we can wrap this with an anchor tag. Anchor href equals whatever that link URL is, and then wrap that anchor tag around the image. Okay, that looks syntactically correct. Right, so now when I click on one of these, if there is a link behind it, it will or should take me off there. So if I go to the where's 1 gone? This is 1. That link should take me to the Festive Tech Calendar page. Good. So that works. Let's refresh everything again. So when you open the door, that's great. Now day 1 worked, but day 25 probably works as well. Day 24 also works. Now that's not really what I want. I want, say, on the 7th of December, the door for number 7654321 can open, but you can't open number 13. So we need to add a little bit of logic to enforce that. So what I'm going to do is add another variable here, which will be called openable. So let's call, say, var openable equals, and I need the date, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add a constant. Date equals new date, so that I can use that date and say date dot get date, which gives me the day of the month, and if that is greater than or equal to the day we're looking at. Now unfortunately today is the 25th, so it's going to be a little bit tricky to test this, so we'll have to fix this somehow so that we can test it. So let's say we'll lie to it and say the date minus 10, so that would make it the 15th, I think. So I'm going to do that as a little test, but we're just trying to get something working. So 7 opens, 18 opens, 24 opens. Didn't work. Oh, because we didn't implement anything. So I need to go in here and say, so openable, we've set a variable called openable. I'm going to set this so that the onClick method says if openable set open, otherwise it doesn't do anything. Right, now it should work. The 4th opens, the 15th opens, the 17th no effect, the 18th no effect, 26 opens, 13 opens, 16 does not open. So our test suggests that that code is working, so I'm going to say that that's probably passed that test. So we've got it now, so it only opens the dates that have already, today or previous dates. And one last thing we can do is say we only want to be able to open them in December, so we can put the advent calendar up towards the end of January if we want to. So we'll say if opener equals the day works and date dot get month equals December. Now December it's a 0-based array, so December will be 11, and we should use a triple equals, and that's a function. So now none of them should work because it's not December yet. So let's try that. And nothing's clickable, not even the 1. I'm going to just set these back the way they were, and I'm pretty confident now. Nothing will be working now, of course, but I'm pretty sure we now have a working advent calendar. So I hope that was useful and fun. I haven't put the code on GitHub because I want you to do this yourself. There's only a few lines of code that need typing. I would strongly encourage you to get Visual Studio Code started up and build this yourself, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. So thanks very much, and I hope you have a lovely Christmas or whatever seasonal festivities you prefer.